Welcome back to the Full View on SABC News. If you've been with us, welcome. If you've just tuned in this Women's Day, as we continue to focus on the wonderful strides made by women in South Africa, but also the cloud of gender-based violence and so many other issues.
And good evening. My name is Bongi Wezwane. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be in conversation looking at whether or not South Africa is a safe place for women and what needs to change on that front. And it was also the big focus of the President's address this afternoon. But let's start with the headlines.
Princess Shemida Katz has been inaugurated as the first queen to the throne of Katz Royal House.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says government is finalizing plans for a gender-based violence and femicide summit in November.
South African women made history in the recently concluded Commonwealth Games and World Athletics Under-20 Chaps.
And we're asking you, considering the state of crime against women in our country, what can be done to curb the scourge of violence against women? We're keen to hear from you tonight on what needs to be done and also to rid women of this burden of vigilance.
Leading the bulletin this hour, Princess Shemida Katz has been inaugurated as the first queen to the throne of Katz Royal House.
The coronation ceremony took place in Kimberley in the Northern Cape. The new queen is the eldest child of the late Royal House leader King Joshua Katz, who passed away on the 4th of March in 2021.
Well, the late king was the recognized leader of the Korana, falling under the Khoi and was one of the signatories of the Christian African Union, who assisted in returning the remains of Sarah Baartman from France and reburied her in South Africa. Queen Shemida is the first female to step into a male-dominated space and to be recognized as the official queen.
King Joshua Katz passed away last year, and as the eldest daughter, Princess Shemida has to take forward the family's legacy. She says her coronation came during Women's Month and there's no better time to highlight issues facing women.
President Cyril Ramaphosa now has appealed to men to take responsibility for gender-based violence. He was addressing thousands of women during the National Women's Day commemoration in Richmond in KwaZulu-Natal in the Midlands. He's also condemned alcohol abuse, saying it is closely linked to the scourge of sexual abuse and violence. The President's address comes amid increasing incidents of violent sexual abuse against women and children.
We as men are the ones who are causing these problems that make the women of our country to be afraid to walk in the streets, to walk in the pathways of our rural areas. It is a problem of men who have no respect for women, who feel that they can do whatever they like with their girlfriends or their partners because they buy them airtime, they buy them food, they buy them clothes or groceries. It is a problem of men who lack the maturity to accept the end of a relationship and hunt down their ex-wives or ex-girlfriends and even kill them in the process. It is a problem of men who think that culture, custom and religion empowers them to hit their wives, their sisters, their daughters, and some of them to even hit their own mothers, and by so doing deprive them of their rights. It is a problem of men who hold positions of influence and authority. And I heard the young lady here was saying that abanye who hold positions of authority, uma umuntu wesifazane ufana ukuthi advance, they demand sex, they demand favors because they happen to hold a position of authority. And this must come to an end. Taking advantage of women must come to an end. Here in Richmond, like in many places around the country, sexual assaults and other violent crimes are connected to alcohol abuse, and many take place in or around places where alcohol is sold. It takes place ematavernini, emashebhinini, and that is where all these assaults happen. This is not the South Africa for which the women of 1956 marched.
Let's reflect on the meaning of today, the role of women in leadership, the safety of women, among other issues. And of course, if you saw the Sunday Times this particular weekend, a very powerful front page that they put up there is South Africa, a safe country for women. And this is, of course, as they put the faces of some of the victims of gender-based violence. No country for women is what this front page said. Very powerful as it talks about just the abuse that has been endured by women and at the hands sometimes of intimate partners, of strangers, of men that they don't even know, or men that are known to them as family members. So let's talk about this with the Commission for Gender Equality Commissioner Busisiwe Deyi, Wise for Africa Collective Women and Rights Activist Director Advocate Brenda Madumise, and the Money Savvy Brand CEO Kathryn. Thank you so much to you all for your time this evening. Busisiwe, let me begin with you. Share your reflections as we mark Women's Day.
Well, I think that I'm a bit disappointed that we seem to be going backwards in some of these issues. I think that South Africa has had and continues to have quite pointed and researched interventions around what works in preventing gender-based violence. And what has happened is the progressive defunding of those interventions over the years. When Thuthuzela care centers were implemented, they were supposed to have been something that grows throughout the country. There was supposed to be a one-stop shop that would offer victim-centered services around gender-based violence. And what we've seen, particularly in 2005, that there was a progressive defunding of these interventions. And I think that whilst these gender-based summits are important, I do think that they need to go beyond just being a talk shop. They need to start budgeting. We need to start putting money into these recommendations around how do we effectively deal with gender-based violence in South Africa.
And I'm going to get to that issue of the summit that you raised, because we do hear now that there's another one in the cards, and we saw another one in 2018. But let's start with your reflections, Kathryn.
So I think it's pretty sad that our focus on Women's Day is really around gender-based violence and the atrocities to women rather than celebrating the givers of life. And it saddens me because a lot of women stay in these situations because of lack of education, lack of opportunities, and lack of mentorship. And, you know, that's what we do as an organization, is we create those opportunities, and we actually need more people to step in to say, how can we help women with opportunities to create their own healthy entrepreneurship or business or healthy environment where they are contributing to a society, so they're not stuck in those environments with those kind of people.
And for you, Advocate Madumise, share with us your reflections briefly. Advocate Madumise, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, my apologies. Sorry, I was muted. I'm saying
we can hear you now.
There's another event that happened. We say the things that are said by the president, and saying that there's another gender summit, gender-based violence summit. It's another talk shop for me, and the president not acknowledging his role as the head of the state in this country in telling South Africa how he has responded to gender-based violence since the first summit in 2018. So we can have all these celebrations and commemorations, but unless we are truthful and honest with and diagnose the problem correctly, we'll continue to have events and hope and pacify women of South Africa thinking that we are addressing the issue. We are not addressing the issue at all in this country. We are not confronting the structural problems of gender-based violence and gender inequality in this country. So we give women some gains and say we have changed the laws. We have done this with policy, and we pacify them and think that things are moving along, when in truth, nothing is moving along. So we are one of the many organizations that are opposed to the second summit, precisely because in 2018, there were undertakings made by this government, and there were further undertakings made by the president himself, making budgets available, 1.6 billion towards gender-based violence. Today, no one has held him and his administration accountable on how that money was expended to ensure that we deal with the scourge of violence, in particular, the prevention of gender-based violence. Until we do that, we'll continue to be talking about gender-based violence until we are blue in our faces. We have to address all the issues that, and especially the structural drivers of gender-based violence. When we speak of resources being made available, where have those resources gone to? And the president must respond to that. It can't be dealt with at another second gender summit. I'm sorry. It can't happen that way.
And listening to you then, Advocate Madumise, and I'm going back to 2018 because you've just taken us there. Part of what was agreed upon was that government and key stakeholders were to establish a multi-sectoral coordinating structure to respond to GBV and femicide, and to allocate the necessary and adequate resources required, and to develop a national GBV and femicide strategy. It sounds like then, from what you're saying, if we look back at 2018, with some of these agreements that I've just summarized now, that has not happened, if I'm hearing you correctly.
We have a strategic plan, national strategic plan on gender-based violence. We don't have a coordinating structure that was supposed to ensure that there is coordination of all the efforts and interventions around gender-based violence in this country. Why we are not able to make the impact that we are supposed to make and scale up the work that is being done is precisely because everything is disjointed. Everyone does whatever they're doing in their little corner, and all of this work is not coordinated. That was supposed to happen out of the summit and out of the national strategic plan that was adopted. The plan is in place. However, we don't have the council that was supposed to be put in place. President, together with his administration, must account on why is it that we don't have that council in place that was supposed to coordinate the work around gender-based violence. We cannot. And I'm going to emphasize, we cannot go to another second summit without taking stock and accounting to what has been done since 2008 on gender-based violence.
Busisiwe, listening to Advocate Madumise, you spoke about the defunding of some of this critical work. Is the main problem a coordinated approach, or is it simply deeper?
Thank you for that question. I think that it raises a number of issues that us as the Commission have identified. We've found that whether we are interviewing the Department of Land, the Department of Social Services, the SAPS, and the various reports that we've produced, that there is no coordination or no programmatic intervention around GBV. Each government structure is working in silos, and oftentimes what that allows is a lack of accountability. Because we don't know how shelters are provided, the SAPS cannot fulfill its mandate to ensure that when it intervenes in a case of GBV, there are safe houses and safe housing available for them to take victims of GBV to, in order for them to get the important safety and psychosocial support. We also know that whilst there are Tutuzela care centers, there aren't enough forensic clinics that process DNA test samples, for instance. An example is the Eastern Cape. The Eastern Cape does not have a functioning forensic clinic currently. So therefore, all of its forensic testing needs are fulfilled through the Western Cape, and sometimes through Gauteng. So that means that these two provinces are heavily relied upon by the Eastern Cape in order to process its forensic evidence. And so you see that there is, because of the lack of coordinated structuring, there's a lack of important sort of connections and networks of solidarity between various government departments. What you're finding that is each government or state organ rather is functioning in isolation, and it allows for the government to continue to not take accountability for its failures in making the needed interventions in the various areas. So I do think that what Advocate Brenda is speaking about is very important, because the lack of action, particularly around a coordinating structure, disallows organizations and institutions such as the Commission and the South African Human Rights Commission from being able to clearly track who is responsible for what and how we can hold them accountable and ensure that they're providing the necessary services in relating to GBV.
Now, Kathryn, listening to this, hearing about the lack of a coordinated approach, how much of a burden does it put on the work that you do, for example, especially when you are trying to address the issues of economic vulnerability, for example, for some of these victims?
So, we get involved at a level where the ladies are now out of the toxic environment and they're in a place of safety. And we come now from an educational perspective and try and give them skills to get back on their feet. But that's a challenge in itself, because these places of safety are normally NPOs. They're not well funded. The runners of the NPOs have little access to finance. There's no support structure for the NPO. And then we go in and we volunteer our time. We running companies, we running small businesses, and now we're dedicating 3 hours of our week to helping empower other women. So we need more structure in that environment where, one, the NPOs that are actually helping these women are funded and that they have the money to bring in experts like us so we can give them the education opportunities and mentorship that they need to get back on their feet.
And Advocate Madumise, one of the things that, we keep hearing about is, and even with the President today, talking about how the women of South Africa have had enough of being afraid to be attacked in their homes or outside. This also adds to the burden that women now have to carry, in fact, to ensure that they are safe, they are not going to put themselves in difficult positions, when this in and itself is a burden on top of the burdens that they already carry.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the women of 1956, what drove them to do what they did was because they were denied a voice and a presence, and they became invincible. What has been happening in this country is that you are making all of us invincible by violating us on a daily basis. And you think by making a speech on National Women's Day that is supposed to pacify us and make it better. It's not. Our safety is at risk, is at stake as a country. And we cannot continue with platitudes. And once we do not hold leaders accountable, we give them a pass to think that it's okay for them to make those speeches and think that we are satisfied with what is being said. The president, together with his administration and the cabinet as a whole, must account for what they have done since 2018. I cannot emphasize this thing more than I have been doing. In 2018, thousands of women marched and said to this administration, we cannot live under the violence that we live under. We went to a summit. We came out with resolutions. One of those resolutions was to establish a national council and a national strategic plan. You have a roadmap that is supposed to assist this country on how to tackle gender-based violence in this country. What is missing in all of that is the funding towards realization of that national strategic plan, but also a coordinating mechanism that is going to ensure that we get the scale that we're looking for. and have the impact that you want to make around gender-based violence. Come on. We cannot continue like this any longer. And Mr. President, wherever you are, you have to hear this. You cannot continue to speak to us as if we not know what you are doing. You have been coming out platform after platform telling us of what this government is supposed to be doing. And you have said you are going to make resources available. You have failed to do so. Why should women in this country believe you in going to a second summit and hope that something is going to change? Nothing's going to change if you continue on this trajectory. I'm sorry, nothing's going to change.
And Kathryn, when one looks at the daily torment that women talk about, I mean, you think about, for example, the sharing of trip information when one of your friends is using e-hailing services, the anxiety that comes with approaching a group of men who are either gathered at a corner as you're trying to walk past. What does this further then do to the women's anxiety levels?
Well, it's scary because we're so busy as women telling ourselves not to get into these situations where we can be in danger, instead of actually teaching our men to treat women with respect. You know, so I think it's got to go right back to a grassroots level, and we need to start educating our sons instead of women being fearful. And that comes from us as women. It's our job to make sure that our sons are not treating women unfairly.
And Busisiwe, right at the back of that, you know, when you listen to the president today, he talks about, you know, women being afraid and they're tired of being afraid. And you listen to quite a lot of people talk about how afraid women are. But is there an understanding, according to you, as to just what they mean when they talk about the fact that women are afraid?
I think that part of what patriarchy does is that it attempts to control the terms through which women participate in the public space. But also it holds sort of a promise of violation at the same time, where those performances are not adhered to within the public space. So if a woman is dressed, if a woman exists merely in public, it is about the woman always being available for the male gaze, for male desire, and to be receptive to the advances of men. And so what that does is it objectifies women. It renders women only functional as either sexual objects or reproductive objects. And so it disallows women the ability to participate as full beings within the public space. And I think that the problem with situating this as a problem of catcalling rather than a problem about exercising power, rather than about an unequal distribution and control of resources within the public space, because we know that women shoulder most of the emotional and economic labor within the home. And so that translates also in how women need to access the public for economic opportunities. So what you end up having is that there's this limiting of the public space, I think, through this sort of punitive regulation where the threat of violence is always at the ready for women. And so that limits our ability to engage in the public space for economic activities and for entertainment activities. But also what it does, it also limits our ability to provide and become the true heads of our households. We know that a lot of South African households are actually not male-headed households. We have single mother-headed household as the majority. Then we have child-headed households. Then we have elderly-headed household. And only then do we have male-headed households. And so when you look at this distribution of the personal labor, and you see sort of this unrelenting removal of women from the public space and public participation, you see truly how This is about controlling who is able to access the public space and therefore access economic resources, as Kathryn has said. But also it's about ensuring that the threat of violence where women misbehave or bad women exist is consistently enforced, as Advocate Brenda has pointed out rightly, through GBV, both in the personal and in the public space. So I think it's a misrecognition or a limited recognition of truly what things such as controlling how and when women enter into relationships, how and when women are able to participate in the public space, but also how women feel within the public space in terms of their levels of security.
Kathryn, is there an understanding and a very clear understanding of the difficulty that women who are not economically empowered are being placed in when there's issues around, abuse, especially on the access to resources? Do you think this issue is getting adequate understanding and adequate resourcing?
Absolutely, my answer is no. It's not getting enough attention and it's not getting enough resourcing. We're seeing it ourselves when we're working in these environments. The NPOs are completely underfunded. They don't have money and resources to get these women back on their feet. And they have to bring in external providers. And if we're not volunteering our time, then nobody's going.
Very difficult to hear that, Kathryn. Let's come back to you, Advocate Madumise. We're talking tonight. I mean, you and I were speaking actually last week about that disturbing, very, very horrific rape, that took place in the West Rand. 8 young women were violated so gruesomely. And yet today we're sitting, no one has still been positively identified to that particular matter. How does that make you feel?
I think I said it before, that we are overly excited to be told that there are 67 people arrested, 80 arrested. And where are we now? The attention and the focus is on illegal zamazamas. No one is talking about the 8 women who have been gang raped. No one is talking about when we will get to know who are the perpetrators of this gruesome action. And so it goes, and that's the reality of many South Africans. And we'll have to wait for, I don't know how long, for us to know whether the 80 that has been arrested, any one of those 80 is linked to rape of those 8 women. And that's where we are. But we made a hoo-ha of it, of 67, 80 men arrested. And where are we now? The focus is on illegal zamazamas, not on the 8 women who have been gang raped, because we're still waiting for the South African Police Service to do what they're supposed to do and link those who have been arrested to the gang rape of the 8 women. That's where we are.
And Advocate Madumise, as we're winding down this conversation, I'm going to come back to you before I go back to the others. The proposal of chemical castration is back on the table. Your thoughts?
So chemical castration, and I think for the Women's League and ANC who put this proposal together, they need to go back and ask themselves, for what purpose? So if you look at different jurisdictions in the world on chemical castration is not a punishment, is a treatment in almost all those jurisdictions. If you look at the US, you look at South Korea, you look at Europe, it's always meant for those who commit crimes of sexual assault, pedophilia against children. And it's a form of a treatment to stop a perpetrator from violating children, right? So if we go back to all of that, you will see that it was meant to deal with those who we believed had a condition and an urge to violate children, and we're going to try and stop them by bringing in chemical castration. Now, the proposal that is being put forth by the ANC and the ANC Women's League around chemical castration is meant to deal with rape in general. What we are missing from this discussion is how rape manifests itself. Rape is about power. It's violence on its own, right? It's got nothing to do with whether you are castrated or not castrated, but it's once you recognize it as violence on its own and a power, a violent, powerful tool that men use against women, then you will not be proposing castration as a solution to dealing with rape. And maybe what needs to happen, sorry, Bongi, what needs to happen is that the ANC, together with the ANC Women's League, has to do some work around why those jurisdictions found it appropriate to bring in chemical castrations for sexual assault on children and pedophilia, not rape in general.
Kathryn, how do we begin to break the wall and chart a way forward to ensure that, people like yourselves who are ensuring that women who are leaving these homes are in independent positions as far as the finances are concerned? How do we then begin to break the walls that exist now towards you getting all the assistance that you require to make sure that this is a reality for many women?
Well, we need to start with educating the NPOs in number one, how to raise funds, making sure that the NPOs are 100% compliant, that they know that they have a PBO number, that they can issue 18A certificates so that they can go out to corporates and start looking for funding. Because a lot of that education is lacking. A lot of the reason these women set up these NPOs is because they came out of a situation themselves and they're not really skilled in running an NPO from a financial and business perspective, because it needs to be treated like a business. So really stepping in from a mentorship level and mentoring the NPOs. How do you raise funds? How do you write a proposal? How do we get you compliant? How do the 18A certificates work? And then how do you target corporates to get the funding that you need to help these women get back on their feet?
Busisiwe, we have 10 seconds. Talk of another summit, talk of more solutions. How do we chart a way forward in about 10 seconds?
I think, I'll just briefly touch on the male castration issue. I think it infantilizes men. As Advocate has pointed out, it is about, chemical castration was about fixing what people could not control in relation to protecting children. And so I think it infantilizes men. It removes accountability from men and their actions. I think what is important is that the Department of Social Services needs to take back safe housing. A lot of safe housing is in the hands of NPOs, and I think that it has become sort of like a privatized space. And I think that the Department of Social Services needs to take back safe housing for women and making sure that they provide safe housing that is inclusive for everyone, including LGBTI, particularly trans women who find themselves in situations of gender-based violence. So I think we know what we need to do. Resourcing, making sure that the systems that we put in place are continuously monitored, and making sure that there is a feminist budgeting process that centers women in what we spend money on in this country.
All right, let me thank you all for your time this evening. Do appreciate it. That was Busisiwe Madumise, in fact, Busisiwe Deyi, pardon me, Commission for Gender Equality Commissioner, Wise for Africa Collective Women and Rights Activist Director Advocate Brenda Madumise, and the Money Savvy Brand CEO Kathryn Main. Thank you so much to you all for your time. A very important conversation we just had. On that note, let's take a recap of the headlines.
Princess Shamira Katz has been inaugurated as the first queen to the throne of Katz Korana Royal House.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says government is finalizing plans for a gender-based violence and femicide summit in November.
South African women made history in the recently concluded Commonwealth Games and World Athletics Under-20 Championships.